Again, thank you for joining. We're just going to give it one more minute to let people dial in. We're right at 9 o'clock right now, and then we'll get going. Thank you, everybody. Okay, Bridget, do you want to get us started?
Absolutely, happy to do so. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our nonprofit cafe. Thank you so much for joining us. So just a couple of housekeeping things as we get started. You all are muted at this time. If you can stay on mute throughout the session, we will save some time at the end for questions, and that'll be a good opportunity to unmute yourself, and Maggie will help facilitate that process. But in the meantime, if you don't mind staying muted, that will help with everybody's ability to listen. We also have a chat function on the right side of your screen to ask questions throughout the session. These are questions you can ask to your peers or to the speakers themselves, and we'll try to track those a little bit to help facilitate that question answer time at the end. We also know that your time is valuable, especially during this unprecedented time. So thank you for being here. Our mission at the Community Foundation is to connect people who care to causes that matter to build a better community. And as your local community foundation, it's also important for us to support you, our nonprofit leaders, in your work. And we do this by providing you professional development opportunities like this nonprofit cafe, and by also supporting your work through some various sources of funding at the Community Foundation. And so this week, if you didn't hear, we announced that in response to the COVID-19 crisis, the Community Foundation, in partnership with the Greater Gallatin United Way, has launched a community response fund to address the pressing needs of individuals and the organizations serving them in Southwest Montana. This response fund will provide flexible resources to organizations working with individuals and populations disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus and the health and economic consequences of this outbreak. We are in the final stages of completing a short questionnaire for organizations to fill out who are interested in this funding, so please stay tuned for those details. Our goal is to distribute this funding as soon as possible, as we know that your needs are now. So for more information on this fund, you can go to our website at bozemanfoundation.org, and we're also happy to answer any questions that you might have about it. So as your community foundation, we wanted to provide you access to important information as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that there is a lot of information out there and that it can be overwhelming. This week, we learned that 3.3 million people have filed for unemployment. We know that you're facing this crisis in so many ways, at home and at work and in the communities that you serve throughout Gallatin County, and that this is upending our lives and causing many of us to work from home if we're lucky enough to do so. And we acknowledge the emotional toll that this is taking on ourselves and for those that we love and our organizations. And navigating this uncertainty is hard in the best of times. This is just hard, y'all, and all of you are serving as important community partners in these extraordinary times, and we are here to support you. We're here to help you for the long haul because we know that this is going to be a long journey. But we're going to get through this together. So today, we're pivoting our nonprofit cafe topic to be responsive to the questions and concerns that we've heard from many of you as a result of COVID-19. And please, we welcome just continual conversation with all of you about what you're seeing on the ground and challenges that you're facing. So don't be afraid to give us a call or shoot us an email to keep us updated about what your organization is facing. But for this session, we've curated 3 speakers to address some of these top concerns right now. So today we are so grateful for 3 fantastic speakers who have joined this call to support you. So the first is Liz Moore, Executive Director of the Montana Nonprofit Association, and she will speak to the state of the sector as it relates to COVID-19. She'll share some statewide resources and important legislation for you to be aware of. Next, we have Suzi Berget White, who serves as the Business Development Director of Prospera. And today, Suzi will be exploring information on small business loans and how those can support your nonprofits. And lastly, we'll be hearing from Lilia Tyrrell as a partner at Kasting, Kauffman Mersen, and she will be speaking to unemployment law. So first we'll hear from Liz and then Suzi and wrap up our conversation with Lilia today. So as a reminder, there'll be time for questions at the end, so please stay muted until that time. Feel free to use that chat function on the side of your Zoom screen. And we are just so grateful that you are here and so grateful for these speakers who very last minute have dedicated their time and volunteered their time to be here today to support you, our nonprofit leaders. So Liz, we welcome you to begin.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. So some of you are tuned into Montana Nonprofit Association's work and have been receiving our e-news. If you haven't, we've been sending, usually in the morning, we'll send something programmatic about what we have going on for the day and the week. And then in the evening, it's generally kind of a news update. Like last night, we sent a copy of Governor Bullock's stay-at-home directive, just to make sure that nonprofits on our list anyway have access to up-to-date information. We've been very consumed with federal work, federal legislation up to this point, and there will be some more of that because there will be a phase 4 of the relief package where it's kind of a mop-up of what's missing. And so there will be an additional opportunity to get a couple things in there that we didn't get. But now the task for us is to really focus on what's happening in the state. And some of that is public policy, but some of it also is just kind of taking a constant read of what's happening in the nonprofit sector and conveying that out appropriately to the public, to our elected folks and legislators, and to administration, and also to partners to the nonprofit sector, such as philanthropy. So we've been, that's kind of what we're focused on now, is how do we very, very rapidly, well, everything we're doing is really rapid because the whole plan we had for the spring, just like you all, the whole plan is gone. So it's required a really quick change. So I'm going to talk about how things are going in the nonprofit sector, and then I'll talk a little bit more about federal legislation and some about state legislation, and then a few minutes on kind of what's the call then for nonprofits. So let's go to the next slide. This was last week when we did a flash poll. We had 435 respondents, which we've never had to any of our polls, and within less than 3 days. And so the sense of anxiety and uncertainty, and you can see it here, the concerns really were around internal stuff, staff, remote work, events, cancellations, all of that. That's where we were focused. We have a survey underway right now. It won't close until tomorrow morning, but if you could go to the next slide. This is what it looks like with 125 respondents that had responded as of last night. The focus is much more on safety, health, mental health, children, isolation. And so we've been able to fairly quickly I think as a sector, get things under control in a sense for ourselves, but the concern for our constituencies is rough, with a couple of exceptions. I think there are organizations that aren't direct service, aren't frontline, like arts organizations who, you know, they're just like, they canceled events that they'd already paid the expenses, and like big expenses, performance fees and things like that. Not just the event expenses, but whoever they had lined up to perform, you know, those cancellations did not always come with reimbursement of the fees. And so that's a different kind of stress. Conservation, I think, you know, is a time to shine, especially in Montana, with the governor saying stay at home except go out and walk and hike, which is wonderful. And but there is still that concern about putting off events that really are the bulk of the, you know, like the runs and the trail walks and things like that are the bulk of the funding for those organizations. But it is gratifying to see the change over time. Is there any chance that I could screen share for just a second and show kind of what it's looking like right this minute? Or is that impossible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to try, and then I can stop on my end?
You have to stop on your end.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I have to figure out how to.
So for me, Liz, it's at the bottom of my screen. It's like a green button.
All right, and it's this, and I'm going to share this. Okay, so this is that's not it. Let's see. If this doesn't work, I won't do it. I'll try once more. Share that. Can you see the survey results?
We could just a second ago. There they are again on the edge.
Okay, all right.
So if you pull them back in.
Is that, you can see that scrolling?
No, we can just see the
other one.
Yeah, there it is.
Oh, so you can see it now scrolling?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with 125 respondents, which is what we have this morning, one of the things I want you to notice is almost every county in the state has responded. And I think, you know, last I counted, there were like 40 counties that have responded. And then this is the areas of work. So I think this is kind of moving. Domestic violence, early childhood, economic development, housing, and then of course, our favorite word as nonprofits, other, because we will not be categorized. Then this was what I really wanted to show you, was the immediate concerns. I hope you can see that. So housing, safety, people, services, service was the most used word, mental health, keep children concerned, isolation. You know, the thing that is, so I stopped screen share, but the thing that is most compelling, I think, for me reading the survey results is the concern for children. That's really hard. And, you know, the children that were recently reunited, it's kind of tough times. If you go to slide 5, the next one. Yeah. So, you know, this is hard to read. It's because the most vulnerable among us really are the children. And so everything from school children to children that have just recently been returned home, to, you know, some of the large or even small mental health providers for children that, you know, aren't able to serve them right now. So There's a lot of concern about funding and how we're going to open the doors, but there's also tremendous concern about the needy, the neediest people, brothers and sisters we have in our neighborhoods. So to the next slide. Let's see. Yeah. I'm sorry, I want to go back up again. So I want to talk for just a minute about some of the primary concerns of the subsector groups, and you all know this probably better than I do. I have to ask, you already know it because you're living it. So for the arts, really the primary concern that I've heard is just that, organizations are completely shuttered. Events are lost, never to be regained. In some cases, there are postponements, but in other cases, like I said, for performance events, that's gone for the year. Childcare, it's not just the children, it's the childcare businesses which operate on such a slim margin. And so there's, I would put that as one of those frontline services that as soon as we have a stand-up date, that those groups get funding, because they need to be open and going on day one. And in order for the rest of the system to work, which and if you are a child care provider, I think this is a real opportunity in the sense that I was actually thinking, I think this is the best time to ask for state-funded childcare or early childhood programming. All these folks that have been home, maybe they would be inclined to fund it now. In terms of homelessness, there is a lot of concern about illness, and if they have the coronavirus, they're sheltered, how do we deal with that? And I know there are some hotels and B&Bs and things like that that are doing some work in that area, but that's a real concern. In the area of mental health, obviously the concern about isolation and that toll that's taking, PTSD, money fears, all of that. And we're going to see it come home that many families that aren't in poverty still live paycheck to paycheck. And there's a lot of fear around that. And of course, then along with that, you see a spike in domestic tension and abuse. Then, of course, health and safety, that is, I think that's front of mind for everybody. And just the health workers and wellness. Animal shelter, those expenses are continuing regardless of, like nothing has changed there. And so that's a tough one. And because people sometimes don't think about it, but those animals are being taken care of and the expenses are there. In terms of education, most of what I've seen is just the losing ground and that it won't be regained. And what a compassionate and dedicated core of educators we have in the state. Group homes that are still ongoing. So for example, in Helena, the YWCA and the Florence Crittenden home that are still serving clients who live there. Honestly, the biggest issue is cleaning supplies. And I've seen some nice things on Facebook, I'm sure you have too, where, like if you go and you're not using your quota or whatever it is for cleaning stuff, get a little bit extra and send it forward. Then food insecurity and hunger, I think we're acutely aware of that. I'm very grateful to the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation for stepping up in that area and others. And conservation, I already talked about the funding base. And then, there are these niche programs like the AmeriCorps programs, where all of a sudden you have this work group that can't work. And then there's the added insecurity of what happens with the upcoming groups who were going to come in. Will they still be able to? So that's just a snapshot. You all know because you're seeing it, but that's kind of an aggregate. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So federal advocacy, you're kind of aware of what all has happened in this area. I'll do just a very brief recap. First of all, there was a coalition of about 200 national groups, and I think for those of you who are members of Montana Nonprofit Association, we every year give $10 per member to the National Council. That's our fee, or it's not membership dues, I guess. So, you know, that's like $7,000, which is a huge, you know, that's a big amount of a budget. This is why. And the National Council really was the, I would say, at the very epicenter of advocating for the needs of nonprofits in the bill. You know, in the past 10 years, there have been a couple of things, you know, the tax relief stuff, the TARP, those things went in without consideration for nonprofits. That was not the case this time. I think there's a real awareness that we are around 11% of the economy, which is huge in terms of employees and the infrastructure, you know, not just the employment base, but the infrastructure. So on Tuesday night or whatever, I can't even remember, but the last night that the Senate was looking through everything, there was literally, there were senators sitting there with a list from the nonprofit community going, was that in? Yes. Was that in? Yes. You know, so we are at the table in a way we haven't been, and that is the National Council of Nonprofits and others. But I think you can really be proud of, you know, proud of M&A, but really proud of the work of the National Council of Nonprofits. Okay, in terms of the victories, you can see them there, so I won't go over them other than to say, and I'll be interested to hear the presentation right after mine on the disaster loan stuff. So just to be aware, and everybody that's presenting knows more about this than I do. I will know though by next week. So the disaster loans, you know, we were really pushing the disaster loans. And I think that was part of, that was the early information we had. The 7A loans are forgivable. And so just really be thoughtful about choosing how you go in and get relief, because you can't double dip. So be thoughtful about that and what it means to have a forgivable loan, whether you can, you know, read the fine print on that. On the disaster loan registration page, a mandatory checkbox was the Social Security number. And so we were working with all three of our congressional offices, just saying, you know, nonprofit executives can't put their own Social Security number on a loan document. They don't own the goods. They can't sign off on the collateral in that way. So we were really going to bat for that. Now, I understand with the 7A money that is not the case. I don't know. I'll be anxious for somebody to go in and see if in that disaster loan registration, like you couldn't even get to the application unless you provided your social. So the fact that it's all open to nonprofits as businesses, we also cleaned up the language. There was private nonprofit, public nonprofit. Nonprofits are eligible, but charities are not. I think for faith-based organizations, really get tuned into whether you are a religious organization or a business, and whether you can, you know, because I don't know how that funding will work yet. And what I've heard is that religious organizations don't qualify, but that was 3 days ago. And so I don't actually, know right now. Let's see. There's an employee retention payroll tax credit. The nice thing about this is that it's not income tax, it's payroll tax, which does allow nonprofits to take advantage of it as well. And then of course the direct payments to adults, and then the unemployment insurance. One of the things we were concerned about, because nonprofits in statute can choose to self-fund. So for example, at M&A, 90 of our nonprofit members have their funding through First Nonprofit, which is a trust. So you send in a lesser amount than you would send the state, and it goes on your books because other than an administrative fee, it stays as an asset. They hold it, and then if you have a claim, you go through the state, but the state gets the money from First Nonprofit. There are also organizations that have their own fund, and First Nonprofit has stop-loss insurance, but if you have your own fund, you probably don't. So one of the things we've been really getting a handle on is making sure that the unemployment insurance directive or rule from the governor, because that's a state issue, not Fed, that the unemployment insurance directive he gave covers reimbursable or those self-funded organizations. We believe it does 100%, but we'll have to wait, I think, until we get in there. And I am a like, show me the proof. And so everybody that's looked at it thinks it's fine, but I want to wait and make sure that it works out okay. Then there was $150 billion for a state, tribal, and local relief fund, $130 billion for hospitals, $30 billion for education, and then transit systems as well. And so all of that is great news. And then there will be, I'm not going to go into kind of what's next. There was a $300 above the line deduction for charitable giving. Interestingly, I saw in a tax bulletin that was included as an example of a piece of legislation that had nothing to do with relief. And it was like people are just trying to get their own agendas taken care of. And I think that was written by a person who doesn't understand the intersect between philanthropy and our ability to meet needs. And so I think we need to go to bat for that. And I believe that in the phase 4 part, we'll probably ask for a more generous deduction that could be through 20 and 21. So that's what's happening with the federal level. Okay, at the state level, we started by writing a letter to Governor Bullock, basically with these points. Communicating that nonprofit employers are businesses, and we have 2,200 nonprofit employers in Montana. Even when you take the hospitals out, we have about 30,000 nonprofit employees. That's a huge employee base. And but most nonprofits don't really know how to navigate what I would call the commerce system, like the loans and all of that stuff. Most of us haven't had the collateral to be able, we might have a line of credit for cash flow, but that's about it. And so this is a big deal for us. So we wanted nonprofits to be included in any relief, and have been advocating for that for the last 3 weeks. And then now we're scrambling to kind of get you the information that you need in order to go in and apply for loans. And I would say if you haven't looked at that, you're already late. And $2 trillion is a lot of money. I don't remember how much is in this particular pool for business relief, but it will go very, very quickly. So, if you have a lender on your board, or if you have a relationship with your lending community, now is the time to call on that and get help figuring out what exactly the loans can be used for. You can cover expenses, but it's not like somebody's going to come in and give you a loan because you didn't have your fundraiser. So, and you need that fundraising money. So how to figure out, your actual needs and how it fits with the federal relief is going to be important. And then, you're going to need to be assertive about getting your needs met. And we'll get information to you as quickly as we can. But the fact is, it's going to happen in local communities. And, as the state money comes down, there's a whole machine. And I believe in the intersect between government, business, and nonprofits. I also believe nonprofits are as essential as a healthy government and a strong business community. So, but we don't have a Department of Commerce behind us. We have no person in state government specifically devoted to the unique needs of the nonprofit business sector. And so you have to go in, read the language, do a rapid dive into all of that so that you can get your needs met. And we will be, I have a meeting today with Sheila Hogan with DPHHS. We'll be meeting with the different commissioners, labor, commerce, and all of that, just to give them a feel, especially as we have the second wave of survey results. Montana Chamber of Commerce has some great resources on their website if you're not tuned into that, and they're front facing, not behind the veil, so anyone can get those. Okay, let's move down to the next slide. I want to mention, so the two things obviously that you're figuring out, and I think Bridget's programming today really demonstrates that, the money and the HR. And they're two different things, but the HR is tied to the money. So keeping employers in place, there's tremendous incentive to keep employees, in place. So again, you need to really look at all of that and understand what you're signing on for. As far as the money goes, we will have next week, whether it's Monday, it won't be Monday, perhaps on Tuesday, we'll have a town hall. We're just doing those every day, kind of on a just-in-time basis. And on Monday, we'll have Congressman Gianforte will be on at 2 o'clock. We're trying to get all of our congressionals over the next 2 weeks, and the governor as well. So Congressman Gianforte is 2 o'clock on Monday. Then I'm hoping on Tuesday we have something on money. But honestly, don't wait for that. And then the HR stuff, we did a town hall yesterday on HR, and it was an hour and a half and 100 people, and everybody was just like listening because the unemployment things are big. And I know you've got that coming up in your presentation. So if you are an M&A member, right now, everything has been, everything M&A has done in the last 3 weeks, we've just opened it up. It doesn't matter if you're a member, no charge. We did negotiate a relationship with, or we are negotiating a relationship with Weststaff. Jim Nyes is a resource for the entire state, has traveled the state for decades really in HR. And so we negotiated a deal that if you're an M&A member, you can have access to their resource library that usually is a $200 per entity charge. We will also have 2 classes, Zoom classes a week with Jim and Weststaff on negotiating HR issues. And then if you need more than that, you can call them and get a cut rate on how to consult on your own HR issues. So just know that HR stuff is a big deal, and we're providing access to our members. So if you're not a member of M&A, this would be a good time. All right. As the funding hits the states, we're going to continue to be your eyes and ears. So please let us know what's going on. In terms of philanthropy, I want to say the philanthropists community is really thoughtful, and we're the foundations are well aware there are things going on in local communities, and so we're kind of talking through what would be the need for a larger statewide fund, and I'm hopeful that we'll end up with that in Montana. That's nothing I can do other than try to influence, which I have tried mightily. But the philanthropists are thinking about the very immediate, most vulnerable needs, and then also what's the stand-up time going to look like when we're kind of on the other side of this, and how long is that going to last, and what will the needs be then? It's relatively small amount of funding, but it's really important, as you know, in your own community, really important. And part of it is the money, and part of it is just the reassurance that people see you, that they see what's going on, and are there for you. So, one of the phrases that I've used with philanthropists as I've been talking is just that, we're not asking the business community what they need in order to make it. We're expecting innovation. We're expecting people to, figure out as best they can how to do things differently right now. But the fact is, what's really needed is money, which is what the relief package is all about. So, while I'm going to encourage strategic thinking and planning and all of that, the largest, most kind of sophisticated, if you will, nonprofits in the state are under significant duress, not because they're not planful, but because they rely on sales, just like business, and have had to shut the doors. So it's not a matter of not being good at business. It's that, you know, there is a time when really the answer is money. And so I've been kind of carrying that, waving that flag, and I think successfully. Okay, next slide. So this is the now what slide. We did a strategic thinking town hall on Tuesday, and it's hard because everybody just wants answers. They want the 1, 2, 3. And we're working with JL Camphy, and she really went into who are you? What, you know, going back to the core. And I cannot stress that enough. I believe the landscape will be different on the other side of this, whenever that is. I do not believe all nonprofits or businesses will make it. It's simply not possible. So I think going back to the core of who are we essentially in our mission in the community is going to be critical. Innovation is an opportunity right now. We're already seeing it. So for those of us who have been bemoaning board engagement forever, or like in our case, you know, we have a statewide board. Well, a lot of board members now understand how to use Zoom that didn't know how before. So that's great. We're doing, you know, we've been working for the last 18 months, moving some of our work toward innovation using digital training. And so this really just rocket fueled that, you know, like we're doing digital training. We do, by the way, I want to mention, we do have a great toolkit. Some of you were on the training on Wednesday. A cash flow toolkit is on our website, and it's very concrete. It's fabulous. And I believe the recording is on too that shows how to use it. So as you're figuring out your budgets, that might be helpful. Then using the pause. I think I really appreciated, I got a little note from the Myrna Loy, which is an art center here in Helena, and Chris read a poem about the unplayed pianos in all of us, and that exists. And this is a time when all of us together can play those pianos and see what's here, you know, use the time creatively. I think it's incumbent upon us as a sector to look at the very least, collaboration, and at the most, the potential for merger. I think it would be foolhardy not to kind of look around the community and see where the opportunities are and to begin to have those conversations. Real money on the table conversations. That will be a key to surviving. Now in Montana, we need Main Street nonprofits. That's how we function. You know, when you have 7 population centers and 10 other communities that are so, you know, that are at least 2 hours from a population center, not 2, but, you know, we have a Main Street nonprofit model. That's Montana. It represents who we are. We need that. We don't want all big box nonprofits. Nonetheless, this is an opportunity, especially for smaller nonprofits, I think, to come together and talk about what would a real joint effort look like. And then the last thing I want to mention is just maintaining a spirit of generosity. And we are pretty good at that. But I think it can be easy to think, I got to get mine right now. I need to go out there and scramble for money. And, you know, it's the toilet paper on the shelf mentality. If I don't get what I need, then I won't. And so I think that basic texture of the nonprofit community that is by its very nature generous is a fallback place that's very grounding in spite of everything else that is going on. And then, yes. So what's happening with M&A, we're going to continue doing free programming on COVID-19 as it comes up. So please let us know with immediacy what is needed. We're looking right now at training in the area of the SBA money, and then we'll start soon we'll continue the HR and very soon be looking at kind of business modeling. Our leadership development program, we're going to pivot that and probably start with coaching first and then an immersion later in the fall, rather than we only have like 15 people in that. but there was, that was half of who applied. So we're really excited to launch that. The conference will happen, but it'll be some modified structure. It's not until the third week of September, but we're fairly certain we'll do live streaming plus some kind of community gathering in Helena because we will need it. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you for all you're doing and for being a part of our circle. And please keep informing us as to what you need so that we can be effective on your behalf.
Thank you, Liz. And with that, we will transition to Suzi. Suzi, you're unmuted and you're ready to go.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's great to see you all, or at least see you all virtually. I know that there's been a ton of concern about funding. I mean, that's the call I'm getting morning, noon, and night right now. As someone that helps small businesses in all of Montana, I obviously have a place for nonprofits because I've worked for nonprofits for the last 20 years of my life. So I understand your concerns with funding, and I'd really like to be able to be helpful today in answering any questions that you guys have about all the different loan options that you guys have. Before I move into loan options, I want to touch base really quick about that I am on a weekly meeting with the Governor's Office, Department of Commerce, our city officials here in Bozeman. And so if there's anything that you want me to address in those meetings, I'm happy to do so. But I just want to at least mention that we are at the table every day talking about how we can help businesses and nonprofits, and we're here to help. So I want to mention that too. Excuse me. The first thing I want to talk about is something that we talk about kind of at a 101 level with all of our businesses that we help out at Prospera. So I always start with lines of credit. So obviously, once you've got your financing in place for your organization, I always recommend that people get a line of credit. And it's just something that we have at Prospera. Even I've had it at the other nonprofits that I've worked at before. What it is it's a business line of credit that's a fixed amount of money, which can be accessed whenever you need it. So it's there, you pay a small fee to have it, but typical lines of credits can be anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000, sometimes up to $100,000, especially in times like this. So it's something I do recommend that as nonprofits that you guys look into if you do not have one. I know Liz had mentioned lines of credit before, and so it is something that's common practice, and so it's something that you might want to look at. Just to kind of go over a little bit more details about the lines of credit, unlike a term loan, capital is available to withdraw as needed instead of a lump sum. So a lot of the times people get it's called a term loan where they'll get a lump sum up front. This is not that. This is kind of like a credit card essentially, except for the interest rate's going to be a lot lower. It's going to be more like depending on which bank you go to and lots of different factors, 4 to 6% interest on whatever it is that you're withdrawing. And so it's just a really great option for you, and it offers a lot of flexibility, and especially in times like this. So I want to mention that first before we get deep into the SBA loans. Maggie, would you mind forwarding the slide? Okay, so emergent or economic injury disaster loans. This is what everybody's been hearing about for about the last, 8 days or so. Everything is honestly changing by the hour in my world, with updates and information to pass along with clients. So the one thing I thought I would start off with a little bit more, just going through what is available right now, which are these economic injury disaster loans. I'm including two links right here on this slide. The first one is www.sba.gov/disaster. That is where you actually apply for the loans. And then I'm also including a link to a slideshow with all of your questions about these loans. There are lots of questions, and I think Liz kind of spoke about it a little bit before, where on all of the SBA slideshows it says private nonprofits. Well, we do count as organizations and 501c3s, we do count for these loans. So that has been a little tricky in people navigating whether or not they can apply. But I've spent a lot of time on the phone with the SBA in the last week, and so nonprofits can apply for these funds. Next slide, please. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so like I said, these loans are available right now. And before I get going on that too, know that just normal loans are available. I know a lot of people are kind of caught up on these economic injury disaster loans, but I do want to mention that all the other SBA loans that have been available for years are available now still. There's still lending that's happening. There's still trade, counseling, contracting, all the SBA programs are available. But obviously people are focusing on these EIDL loans. So like I said, you can apply for up to $2 million, and then the nonprofit rate is 2.75, and it's up to a 30-year loan term. So I am encouraging nonprofits to apply for this. There really isn't any harm in applying. I think Liz had mentioned that earlier on. If you haven't looked at this yet, it is time to be looking at that. And I'll share with you in a couple of slides a little bit more about why it is important to kind of get your name in there. With some new things that are happening with the CARES Act. So bear with me here. I want to make sure everybody's got the details on these, on the current loans that are available. So some sections of the application may not apply to you. Like for instance, a personal financial statement, like Liz said, you know, obviously just because you're an executive director doesn't mean that you have to include all your personal financial information on these applications. There are certain sections that you can bypass, and I'm recommending that you do so. The key is that when you get to the end, you can share a lot about your economic impact. So this is kind of where you're really telling your story about how maybe you've had to cancel some events, that, you know, most of your program income isn't coming in, things like that. And I also recommend really trying to take the emotion out of it. This is a loan, so it means business. They mean business there. So I recommend that you do your best to describe your 2018, your 2019 revenue that you had in March, April, May, June, July of the past 2 years, 2018 and 2019, and show a comparison to 2020, what you're expecting to come in. I'm really recommending that people apply for 6 months of operating expenses at the very least, because as we all know, even if these lifts are even if we can get out there and start getting more active in our communities and these bans are lifted, we know as nonprofits that this is going to take a while for things to recover. Our events probably won't be as attended as they were in the past, especially in the summer months this year. I think we'll see some bounce back in September and October, November, but it's going to take a while. So I just want to make sure that people have enough for operating expenses. And so I'm recommending that you ask for about 6 months worth of operating expenses. The application process is pretty long, and there have been some problems with the website. And so I am recommending that people apply later on in the evening, simply because less people are on it, because it's on East Coast time. And so the later in the evening, the better, is what I'm noticing, for people to be able to get through the application a lot quicker. I have been told that they're using Dropbox for part of the uploads now, so that should be able to expedite things a little bit more, and maybe the site won't crash as often. But I would say start it a little bit later, just so there aren't as many people on the system. So as of right now, they're saying organizations can apply for up to $25,000 unsecured, but what I'm hearing from the district offices in Denver and in California is that they're being very lenient on this. Typically, you have to have, what an unsecured loan means is that it's kind of like a credit card, essentially, where you don't have to have any sort of collateral to back it up. I know some of you guys do have real estate and you guys do have buildings. Obviously, if you're asking for a lot more, you may have to put that up as collateral. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. But at the end of the day, they are being lenient on that $25,000. So I don't know how lenient, but they're saying ask for what you need, and then you'll have a conversation with your loan officer. So I think there's some negotiation there. So I say ask for what you need and then have the conversation later. So in terms of timelines, it takes 2 to 3 weeks to find out if you've received a loan. And so like I said, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to find out so much more about the CARES Act and maybe some other phase 4 funding options, things like that. I know that there have been some other funds that are kind of popping up slowly. And so we might know a lot more. So there's no obligation to get your loan request in right now, because in the next 2 to 3 weeks, you may know that you need that money, or there may be some other options for you. So at least it gives you some options now. And then it typically takes a month or two to get to actually get the money in the bank. So if you think about it now, it's almost April 1st. You may find out by around April 15th if you even could potentially get a loan. You're talking with your loan officer, you're negotiating, and then it may be as early as like May 15th, June 1st before you actually get that money. So so think ahead here a little bit. If you think that you're going to be running out of money in the next month or two, it's worth definitely getting in a loan application. And like I said, here's a slideshow explaining the application process down at the bottom. Now, the next thing is the CARES Act. This is what has sent everyone into a total, it's been a total frenzy. It's been pretty intense the last couple days since this came out. And I think what's been more difficult is that there's really nothing that is available at this time. It's just, people are getting information. The bill is 883 pages long. So it's a long bill. There's a lot of information in there. And so I'm going to do my best to try to, I've been digesting all of this information. I'm going to do my best to kind of educate you guys on this. Now, CARES Act, again, not available at this time. The bill was passed by the Senate 2 nights ago and is now headed to the House. I'm hoping that it passes today. If they approve as presented, the president would more than likely sign this over the weekend or early next week, and most likely it will be 14 to 45 days before the SBA process is actually moving forward with procedures where banks have the right document, the right forms, where they have procedures in place on what needs to happen next. So know that this money is going to be available potentially, but again, we're thinking 45 days before all this happens. So that's a month and a half. Again, we're talking about mid-May or June before we've got access to any of this funding here. So my next conversation with a nonprofit or a business would be contact your banker. So again, my first recommendation would be get a business line of credit set up in the meantime. But while you're doing that, touch base with your banker about these 7A loans that are going to be coming out through the CARES Act. Each bank in all of our communities across the state, but especially here in Bozeman, because most of you guys are from Bozeman, we all have banks that are donors, and a lot of us have bankers that are on our boards. Reach out to them and talk to them a little bit about what their 7A process is going to be. I was just on the phone with the president of Rocky Mountain Bank, and they were the 2019 SBA Lender of the Year. So they have mastered these 7A loans, and so they are kind of getting their clients set up with the current 7A loan procedures and checklists right now, so that when this money does become available, that they're going to be top of the list to be able to apply for these funds. So that's something that I am recommending to my business clients and the nonprofits that I'm working with, is just connect with your banker. This is your time to really be spending time with your banker and start that 7A process if you can. There are certain things that you're going to need in order to get a loan. It is a loan, folks, at the end of the day, and we'll talk about what will be forgiven and what won't be forgiven, but at the end of the day, they need to see that you're serious. So as serious nonprofits, we need to make sure that we've got access to our past financials. So that's profit and loss documents, balance sheets, and they're going to look for 3 years. That's typical in any loan that you have 3 years of financials. They're going to ask for audit reports. They're going to ask for a short business plan. So if you don't have one, this is probably the time to work on one. And so even though that a lot of these loans will be expedited, they're still going to need to know exactly what you do and what your programming is. So I would start working on that now. And then I would obviously include any documentation or information on any financial trends. So for instance, maybe you're a new nonprofit that just started, and your first year you were just in startup phase, you're spending a lot of money on your nonprofit, and then year 2 you had a really great fundraiser. So I would kind of explain when there are huge jumps in your financials, both positive and negative, just because they're going to want to understand these things a little bit more. As someone that looks at financials all day long, it is nice to have an explanation because we don't know your story. So be sure to be clear about your story and accurate and professional about your story, and you shouldn't have any problems. If you do have real estate, they're going to probably want information about your real estate as well. So if you have vehicles, real estate, any major equipment, not computers, any major equipment for your organization, anything that's worth more than $1,000 or $2,000, we're going to want to know that, as lenders will want to know that, just because that is potential collateral. And so whatever we can do to strengthen your ask, I think is really important at this time. Maggie, would you mind forwarding to the next slide? So as someone who has been digesting this information morning, noon, and night, this is where it's getting tricky. So like I said, the information that's out there is 883 pages long. I obviously have not had time to do that, since who has time to read 883 pages of a bill and watch their children full time and all that other fun stuff that's happening in our economy right now. So what I'm doing is I'm just spending a lot of time working with our SBA offices, and obviously looking at what the National Council of Nonprofits is doing. Liz had mentioned the work that they're doing. So they had done an initial analysis, basically a 1.5-page analysis of everything that's in the CARES Act. And so I wanted to go through that with you guys just to understand what's happening here, especially from the nonprofit point of view. So the emergency small business loans are the 7A loans that we've been talking about. The SBA has been doing these for years. This is nothing new. It's not a new program, but this is going to be a new way of distributing the funds. So I want to be clear on that. This is not a new, 7A loans are not new here. This is funding for special emergency loans up to $10 million for eligible nonprofits and small businesses to cover costs of payroll, operations, and debt service, and provides that loans be forgiven in whole or in part under certain circumstances. So I'll be talking about that in another slide as well. So hold on that one. The general eligibility, available to entities that existed on March 1st, 2020 and had paid employees. Nonprofit eligibility, available for charitable nonprofits with 500 or fewer employees. Loan use, loan funds can be used to make payroll and associated costs, health insurance premiums, facilities costs, and debt service. Loan forgiveness, employers that maintain employment between February 15th and June 30th would be eligible to have their loans forgiven, essentially turning the loan into a grant. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because this has caused a lot of confusion, and I'm getting a lot of phone calls on loans right now, which are essentially grants. So I want to clarify on that. So again, this is from the National Council of Nonprofits. I have a link up at the top of this slide that shows their analysis of the CARES Act from the National Council of Nonprofits, you know, from their perspective. We'll go to the next slide. So as an SBA partner through the Montana Women's Business Center at Prospera, I obviously am very ingrained in what's happening at the SBA, and I pay a lot of attention to the U.S. Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Below their logo right there is their analysis of the CARES Act, and it is a little bit different. So this is what's making folks like us who are in the community helping nonprofits and businesses, this is what's making it difficult, because everyone has their own analysis. And you'll see in these talking points right here that what is said here is a little bit different than National Council on Nonprofits. So let's go through this so you guys understand the difference here. The Senate Small Business Committee on Wednesday night released an overview of the small business provisions included in the CARES Act, as well as one-pager synopsis, which is the link above. The Keeping American Workers Paid and Employed would provide $377 billion to help prevent workers from losing their jobs and small businesses from closing due to economic loss due to COVID-19. The Paycheck Protection Program would provide 8 weeks of cash flow assistance through 100% guaranteed loans. Those are those 7A programs that I talked about, to small employers who maintain their payroll during this emergency. If the employer maintains its payroll, then the portion of the loan used to cover payroll costs, interest on mortgage obligations, rent, and utilities would be forgiven, which would help workers to remain employed in affected small businesses in our economy to recover quickly from this crisis. So I want to make sure that you guys really understand that bullet point, that fourth bullet point, because on the National Council of Nonprofits, they were saying a little bit more about just loan forgiveness in general. Here, they're being more clear on what will be forgiven. If you've got other expenses like mileage and travel and all those things, those will not get reimbursed. So I want to make sure that that's clear. Some of us have expenses that are above and beyond payroll costs and payroll associated costs, interest on mortgage obligations, rent, and utilities. So I want to make sure that it's very clear that separation of what will potentially be forgiven and what won't be forgiven is very clear. You'll still have a loan for that other part of it, and you'll have to continue on with that term loan and pay it. This proposal would be retroactive to February 15th, 2020 to help bring workers who may have already been laid off back onto payrolls. So I know Lilia, my good friend Lilia, she has been an amazing resource through all this. She'll be talking a little bit more about that too with unemployment, but I want to mention that's part of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee's, their bullet points there. And then moving on to the next slide. The Paycheck Protection Program to support loans for small employers with less than 500 employees and certain nonprofits, including 501c3 organizations and 501c19 veteran and tribal organizations. Liz had talked about that. Covered payroll costs include salary, wages, and payment of cash tips, employee group health care benefits, including insurance premiums, retirement contributions, and covered leave. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. The cost of participation in the program would be reduced for both borrowers and lenders by providing fee waivers and automatic deferment of payments for 1 year and no prepayment penalties. So this is huge. That third bullet point is huge, especially for the lenders that have been doing these 7A loans for years. There's always, I'm sure a lot of you guys have purchased homes in the past, so I'm sure you guys understand that there are typically closing fees. There's lots of fees typically involved with getting a loan finished up. So know that they're gonna hopefully be providing fee waivers on all those closing costs, where the banks will get reimbursed from the federal government for that. And then, you know, again, if this passes, automatic deferment of payments for 1 year and no prepayment penalties, that's huge. With the economic or the EIDL loans that I talked about before, depending on what the loan officer does, you may have prepayment penalties. So I want to mention that too, that's really important when you're having these conversations with loan officers, that if things turn around for you guys in a year or two and things are kind of back to normal and you've got a grip on the financials and that you guys don't need that loan, I want to make sure that you guys don't have prepayment penalties. You know, when we do loans at Prospera, we always make sure that there are no prepayment penalties. We want businesses and organizations to be able to, you know, pay off when their cash flow, you know, warrants it. And so that's an important part of understanding a loan agreement too. Now moving on to the fourth dot there, or mark there, loans would be available immediately through existing SBA certified lenders, including banks and credit unions, and the SBA would be required to streamline the process to bring additional lenders into the program. This is also a key important part of the fact here that, like I said, bankers are already set up for the 7A loan programs and all the other loan programs that already exist through the SBA. But it is a slow process. If anyone has ever gotten a business loan before, they know that if their loan is the SBA secured loan, that it typically takes 2 months to get that financing. I'm really hoping that if they can bring on additional lenders, that they can kind of turn these things around a lot faster. The maximum loan amount for SBA Express loans will be increased from $350,000 to $1 million. This is really good news, folks, because I'm telling you, if it's not an Express loan, it's even longer. It's more like 3 to 4 months. So that's great. Express loans provide borrowers with revolving lines of credit. So that's good news. We talked a little bit about lines of credits before for working capital purposes. So this really opens up a lot of things for us. If this truly happens and they truly put some money into staffing and lending, this could really speed things up in terms of getting money into everybody's pockets a lot faster. Okay, next slide. So like I said, I am constantly monitoring, you know, everybody's analysis of the CARES Act, and poor Maggie, I've changed my slides like 10 times for this presentation because things have been changing and I'm finding out more and more every day. So like I said, we talked about those EIDL loans, which was what I talked about, what's already currently available. So this would, according to the National Council of Nonprofits, this would eliminate creditworthiness requirements and appropriate appropriates an additional $10 billion to the EIDL program so that eligible nonprofits and other applicants with 500 or fewer employees can get checks for $10,000 within 3 days. So the small business and entrepreneurship, again, this is their analysis. The EIDL loans in this bill would allow businesses that apply for the EIDL expedited access to capital through the emergency grant in advance of $10,000 within 3 days to maintain payroll, provide paid sick leave, and to service other debt obligations. So the key here is that they put emergency grant here. So in my mind, they're saying that this would potentially be forgiven because it's at the grant level. And so just a little bit different in terms of analysis from different organizations. And so I am hoping that in fact that is true, that there will be an emergency grant for that $10,000. So a couple key differences there. So that was a lot of information. I know that loans aren't always something that everybody knows about. And so we do a lot of teaching about loans. I'm guessing we're going to get a ton of questions about these loans here at the end of this hour, but know that I'm here to help. All of our staff members, our cell phone numbers are on our website, and there's my email address. You know, obviously we'll set up a meeting, we'll chat over the phone, but know that we're here to help you guys as nonprofits, and we want to make sure that our community can get through this together. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Suzi. We'll turn to Lilia now, and then we do have some time at the end for some questions. And then those of you that need to hop off at 10:30, you can feel free to do so, but I have a feeling that our questions might go a little bit long as our presenters are able to stay on and help. We don't want to impede on your time as well, but thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be speaking with you and speaking with such a beautiful group of people who are doing beautiful things in our community. So I'm going to talk with you today about some of the HR issues that you may be facing with COVID-19. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about unemployment, and then focus a large part on the requirements of the bill that has already been passed. This is the Families First Corona Response Act. That is going to put some paid, significant obligations on your organization to provide paid leave. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to try to go through this a little bit quickly because I do want to make sure we have time for questions. But so basic unemployment, your employees will be eligible for unemployment whether you actually fully lay them off or reduce their hours. There's no minimum requirement for the number of reduction in hours for their eligibility for unemployment at this time. So I am encouraging employers to, if there's any reduction in hour, any kind of wage loss, to encourage your employees to apply for unemployment. On the whole, they will receive about 2/3 their wage loss, although the amount that an individual receives in unemployment is highly dependent on their own employment circumstances over the past year. We are seeing some additions in the CARES Act, which, as Suzi said, has not yet passed, that will include additional federal benefits for unemployment that might exceed that 2/3 wage loss. There is some concerns, and we can't really address those until we know what's been passed in the CARES Act, that employees may be entitled to full wage loss benefits after passage of the act, which is going to create a sticky situation for a lot of employers because it doesn't provide a whole lot of incentive for individuals to come back to work. Right now, the maximum benefit that an employee can receive is 28 weeks. Again, we are hearing some discussion that may change in the CARES Act. So with this, what I want to do is kind of provide you that general background on what employees are entitled to. We're seeing general payment turnaround checks within 7 to 14 days. But I want you to be careful as you speak with your employees about guaranteeing or asserting that they will receive any unemployment benefits. And I think that's really hard right now because you want to assure your employees that they're not going to have significant wage loss. But you should not be in a position of guaranteeing anything. So the language that I've been advising employers to use is, from my limited information about unemployment, I think you're going to be eligible. Generally people are eligible to, at this point, to about 2/3 of their wage loss, but that's a decision for the state to make, and I encourage you to apply immediately. And I think that's the best language you can use around unemployment. If you'll go to the next slide. Yeah. So the big question here, and Suzi has hit on some issues that we're still trying to figure out how we deal with this, but is whether your separation going to be job attached or non-job attached. So you have three considerations now after Suzi's presentation. Do you maintain your payroll and apply for these 7A loans and see if you can get those loans forgiven related to your payroll costs? That's option one. What I'm talking about option two is job attached or non-job attached when you are not going to continue on your payroll. Job attached is essentially what I like to call an unpaid leave. A lot of people have been using the language of furlough. In those instances, you keep your employee on your health insurance if you have it, on your benefits. I'm going to put a caveat on that health insurance. I'll get back to that. But as of now, you can keep them on your health insurance. You don't pay out their PTO. They basically go on an extended leave. And they will be eligible for the paid leave benefits that I'm about to talk about. Some concerns, let me see if I've got, yeah, let's just go to that next slide on the job attached separation. Some concerns I have on job attached separation is you are going to certify to the state that you intend to rehire this person. And generally you have to give them a date. Of course, now that date is going to be very fluid. And this is a tough conversation in times like these, but when you think about perhaps your redundant employees or employees that are potentially low performing, you need to be careful about certifying to the state that you will reemploy them, because I think on the back end of this, we're going to see significant restructuring of many organizations. So I would save your job attached separation if you're going to do it for your superstars, who you know 100% you're going to have back with the organization, no matter what it looks like on the back end. Of course, if you recognize them as job attached now, at some point you can change your mind because this is a fluid situation. Next slide. So then we looked at, I think hold on. Do we have a not job? Yeah, can we go to the not job attached slide? Yeah, there we go. Sorry. On the not job attached separation, it's effectively a termination. I don't like to call it that because I think that has a connotation of performance issues. So I think your better way to call it is a separation, but effectively they are no longer in your employment. This does not mean you can't ask them to reapply for a position when they return, but you're considering this a final separation at this time. If that's the case, do not guarantee reemployment. I think a lot of people, the tendency is to say, oh, Bill or Kim, don't worry about this. When this is all done, we're going to hire you back. And you just don't want to be making any guarantees of reemployment in such an uncertain situation. So if you do a non-job attached separation, you will need to immediately pay them for their earned wages, unless your employment handbook says otherwise. You'll need to pay them out their earned but unused PTO. If you have a grievance policy, you'll need to attach it to that final paycheck and letter. You don't need to pay sick pay unless your employment handbook says otherwise, and they will no longer be entitled to remain on your health insurance, but will be eligible for COBRA if you are eligible for that program. And the benefit of a not job attached separation is that you'll not be responsible to provide the paid leave obligations that I'm going to talk about next. And I have been getting a lot of questions related to eligibility on health insurance, and so I want to talk about that quickly. You need to speak with your health insurance provider as to whether people on unpaid leave or on significantly reduced hours can remain on your plan. I have been hearing a lot of flexibility around this, particularly from Blue Cross Blue Shield. But that is an individual question related to your individual plan. And likely what they're going to require is if you change your eligibility for health insurance, they're going to require an addendum to your handbook. It can just be a one-page document. That says that individuals, whereas before individuals who worked 30 plus hours were entitled to benefits, now individuals working 10 plus hours, whatever the provision that your health insurance provider provides. So as we talk about, I'm going to move quickly to the emergency sick leave provisions and emergency family leave that were provided in the family, what I'm going to just call the Family First Act, which has been passed. And I think there's a lot of confusion as to whether these sick leave requirements are part of the CARES Act. They are not. This has been passed by the president. So this is in effect. So there's 2 buckets of leave that if you continue to employ individuals or you put them out on a furlough or unpaid leave, that you will be required to provide. The first is emergency sick leave, and the second is emergency family medical leave. So they're 2 separate buckets, 2 different requirements. So we're going to start with emergency sick leave. And employees are entitled to emergency sick leave if we're under an isolation order, which we are at this point. So we can assume that all of your employees that are currently employed or on unpaid leave are going to qualify for that. Qualification begins on April 1st. But by April 1st, or if some period of time after April 1st, we're no longer under the isolation order, then they will qualify if they've been advised by a healthcare provider to quarantine, if they're experiencing COVID symptoms and actively seeking diagnosis, if they're caring for an individual who's under a self-quarantine or statewide quarantine order, or if they're caring for a child who's got whose school or childcare is closed. And I just want you to put a little marker in that because that's also the family leave. But okay, so sick leave is if we're under a statewide shelter-in-place order or a city or county shelter-in-place, or essentially if they're managing symptoms or diagnosis of COVID or assisting others with that. Next slide. So the family medical leave, which is the really extensive paid leave, is only available to individuals who have a bona fide need to care for their child because their school or childcare is closed. And I think there's some confusion about everybody being eligible for the family leave, and that is not the case. It is only available to those whose schools or childcare are closed and they have a bona fide need to care for that child. So that means if you've got an employee who comes from a split co-parenting family where they only have their children one day or every other week, then they're only entitled to the FML leave when they're entitled, when they actually have their children in their care. Or you're entitled to ask employees if they've got a spouse who's staying at home, and that spouse is able and fit to care for the children, then there is not a bona fide need for the second parent to also receive this leave to care for the children. Next slide. Sorry, on the family leave, your employee has to be with you for at least 30 days to be entitled to the leave. On the sick leave, all employees are entitled to that. And so then we get into the duration of the leave. So if it's emergency sick leave, they are entitled to up to 80 hours of leave if they work 40 hours per week. So basically it's 2 weeks of paid leave. And that is for the shelter in place or dealing with symptoms or diagnosis of COVID or caring for individuals in that situation. If they normally work less than 40 hours a week, it's just an average of the 2 weeks, the time they work in a 2-week period. If it's for what we're calling the FMLA leave, the family medical leave, and just to note, I think many of you are like, well, we're not eligible for FMLA. We're not, generally you have to be above 50 employees to have FMLA leave. And that Families First Act made this narrow provision of FML applicable to all employees under 500 employees. Okay, so under the FML leave, they are eligible for up to 12 weeks of paid leave, which is of course a significant increase over the sick leave. So that entitlement to 12 weeks ends either when their school or childcare reopens, or December 31st, whenever that, whichever date is sooner. And let's say what we may see, and we've seen in some other countries, is where we've had schools close, schools reopen, everyone goes back, and then the virus kicks up again, and schools reclose for a second time. As long as that has all happened in the period between now and December 31st, they are able to take this FML leave intermittently. So they can take 3 weeks now, schools reopen, and in 2 months, schools close again. They can then resume, and they'll be entitled to another 9 weeks of this paid leave. And some of the creative ways that I'm advising employers to manage this FML leave is if employees can take FML leave intermittently throughout the day. So they can take 4 hours of FML leave, let's say they're staying at home to take care of children, and realistically working from home, they can get about 4 hours of work in an 8-hour day, given their co-parenting duties. And if that's the case, you can pay them 4 hours of full wages and 4 hours of FML wages. And then you will get the tax credit, which I'll talk about in a minute, for those 4 hours of FML wages. Next slide. So the amount of pay they're entitled to. So if it's for the shelter in place or COVID related symptoms or or orders of self-isolation, then they're entitled to 100% of their pay for the 2 weeks that they are entitled to the pay. There's a max of 511 per day for those reasons. If they're taking pay or taking leave for the FML, or because they're caring for an individual who's under an isolation order, then they're entitled to 2/3 their pay at a max of $200 per day. And you see the aggregates there. They would not be entitled while taking this PTO or FML, they will not be entitled to unemployment benefits. But the state is going to look to you first. So let's say you've got employees right now on unemployment benefits. April 1st kicks in, they're going to be entitled to these paid leave benefits. They will go off unemployment for those 2 weeks where they get 100% paid leave benefits. Then they will go back on after that. And if you have employees who are dual eligible, so they're eligible for the 100% PTO benefits because we're under a shelter in place, and they're eligible for FML, then you're going to pay them the higher of the benefits for the time that they're entitled to it. So that means they'll get paid 100% of their pay for 2 weeks, and then they have a remaining 12 weeks under the FML, which they'll be entitled to their 2/3 regular rate. Can I get the next? Do I have a next slide? No. So yeah, so just to wrap up, I have been sending at this point daily emails to employers in the state, trying to advise them of what's going on. I'm happy to include anybody on this call in those emails. I'm going to give you my email address, but I know Bridget and Maggie have it as well. But my email address is LTYRRELL@KKM as in Mary, law.net. Follow up with the Bridget or Maggie if you need that repeated. Just shoot me an email. I'll put you on the email chain. I'm sending out as much information as I can on a daily basis. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Lilia. I know that Liz is going to have to hop off here in a couple of minutes, so I just want to say thank you to Liz so much. She's got an interview coming up, so I know you all are very, very busy, so we're grateful for your time and so appreciative of you sharing these your expertise with us in this moment. I want to move us to some questions, and we actually had one question emailed to us yesterday. So Lilia, this is probably for you. It says, is it better to be furloughed at 50% right now and then possibly drop to 100% in 2 weeks, or just go 100% now, assuming you'll be there within the next month or so anyways?
And was this coming from an employer or an employee?
An employer, I believe.
Okay, so this is, and I would, Suzi may want to chime in on this too, but generally I have been advising employers that if you are looking at full furlough or a full layoff, now is the time to do it. I mean, the step down, I think, creates a lot more paperwork for you and the employee at unemployment. If you know that you're going to get to full sort of shutdown of your business operations, I would pull the Band-Aid off now. Then you're not obligated to provide the paid leave. And I apologize, I didn't tell you this, and this is a critical part of that paid leave component. You will be entitled to 100% reimbursement of the cost of that paid leave that you provided either under the sick leave or the FML leave through your payroll tax credit. So you pay a 6.2% Social Security tax on your payroll. And you will receive a credit for the cost of that. If your credit exceeds your obligation, you will receive an actual refund check from the IRS. So basically what the government is asking you to do right now is to carry the cost of this leave until your next quarterly payroll tax obligation. But there's a lot of individuals that is not at businesses that is just simply not a possibility. And if that is the case, then I think at this time, it's time to fully lay off so you don't have those payroll obligations.
Susie, do you have anything to add to that, or should we move on to the next question?
And Susie, my only addition is there may be incentives now under the 7A loans to keep your payroll, but
Yeah, this is where it's getting very tricky, because I've got people, it's March 27th and April 1st is next week. And so in some cases, I'm actually, I'm having them call the state. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, but in some cases, I am advising people to wait until April 1st, till we know a little bit more. And then over the weekend, we're going to know a lot more. And so if you're right there on the threshold, but if your store is closing or if your restaurant is closed, I definitely agree with Lilia. There's no chance that you're opening, just rip the Band-Aid off. It's just easier for everyone, honestly. But if there's a chance that you might, start opening up and pivoting and adding some innovation to your business and doing some new things, and you might need that person, I would say hold tight for the weekend before you do that, because I would say April 1st comes next week. You get the 2 weeks paid, and then from there, I would probably say go on unemployment.
Thank you, Susie. The next question is, if you keep 90% of your employees in place but lay off or furlough some employees, are you still eligible for loans, grants, CARES? And it sounds to me, Susie, like it might depend on which of those buckets they go for eligibility.
Yeah, I would say that right now with the loan that is currently available, the EIDL, that doesn't matter. And so you can apply right now. And like I said, start the paperwork now. But if this CARES Act passes, then we also know that you may have incentives to keep those people on. So this has been very tricky for anyone to navigate, because it's really hard to give advice right now. Right now, with what is passed right now, you have access to those grants and loans for sure. But in terms of getting the CARES Act and the 7A loans, which is a totally different loan, you'll need to make sure that those people can come back on. And they're saying that you can bring those people back on. So do as if you normally were, do the things that you're normally going to do. And then in the next week or so, we're going to know a little bit more about bringing those people back on.
Thank you, Susie. The next question says, will nonprofits be penalized if we do have furloughs but rehire before June 30th? Is there a certain percentage of employees we have to keep to be eligible for loans and grants? And again, I think that probably depends on which one it is.
It's going to be 100%. So you'll need to bring everybody back on. And that's people that were employed. They're retroactive to February 15th. So people that were on payroll on February 15th or around that time. So that is to get your loan forgiven. You can still access any of these loans. I want to be very clear about that. It's about the loan forgiveness portion for the payroll taxes, the payroll, depending on what happens with the CARES Act, the health insurance, all those other things. So it's about bringing everybody back on. And if they're unemployment, you will have the option of bringing those people back on.
Okay, thank you. There are just a few more questions, and then I think we'll just keep it as is with questions for now. And answer, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you guys have time, Lilia and Susie, to answer 4 questions?
I do. I have to hop off at 11, but
okay.
We're done with them.
We're moving through these pretty quickly, so hopefully that'll still be the case for these upcoming ones. Someone says, I'm extremely nervous about employees not coming back and staying on unemployment because they can make a full wage and some with unemployment. If we offer an employee their job and they deny, will we have to report that to unemployment?
Yes, and I think that's a really good point. I think Andrea brought that up. That's a really good point. You will have the ability to tell the unemployment office through your paperwork that this individual has work available. And my suspicion is that once we get over sort of the hump of this serious COVID scare, that they will not be entitled to unemployment. The issue right now is that there's a lot of individuals who are selecting not to come to work, self-selecting not to come to work because they are afraid of exposure to the virus. And we don't have an answer yet from unemployment as to whether those individuals will be entitled to benefits. Prior to COVID, they would not have been. If there's work available and you choose not to go, you can't get the benefits. So I think we're going to see some softening around that with unemployment. And then as we kind of get out of the major crisis time, I think we're just going to, I suspect unemployment is going to start saying you need to go back to work.
Okay, thank you. This next question says, if you have employees that separated after February 15th to take other employment or retire unrelated to COVID-19, will we be required to maintain that payroll in order for the loan to become a grant?
Whew, that's a good one. I think obviously if you've got a termination letter and it states that this person is moving on and they've given you the notice, I think you'll have the ability to be able to show that this person terminated after February 15th. So at this point, I don't know the answer, I'm going to be honest, but I think if you've got the paperwork to back up, that this person was no longer employed and this person was not coming back, I think you'll be fine.
Thank you. 2 more questions. It says, if you have an employee whose spouse cared for their kids at home and still does, would they be available for the family benefits? Now all the kids are at home because the older students don't have school.
Yeah, so just a couple of things on that. One of the surprising things that came out of that act is just to that second point is that eligibility for a spouse or a parent to stay home to take care of a kid is any kid under the age of 18. And if any of you remember when you were 15, 16, 17, or have kids that age, they don't need a parent home to take care of them. Most of them don't, I'll say that. So that was a little surprising, but if there's, the language is a bona fide need for a parent to stay home to care for the child. And if we look at general FMLA case law before COVID, there's a lot of case law that says that if there is one parent who has the ability to stay home and care for the child, then the second parent is not entitled to FML leave. And so I would say in that case, as long as that spouse is able to care for the child, if a spouse is bedridden, has serious mental health issues, whatever it is, and actually can't care for the children at home, then the other spouse is eligible for leave. But if that spouse is home taking care of the kids, I think that you have a right to question those benefits. With that said, all of these benefits are 100% reimbursable. So I have advised clients to, if anybody is on the edge, provide the benefits and get the reimbursement for it, because then you avoid any exposure to liability for not providing the benefits. With that said, just a couple of things about that leave. There is a non-enforcement provision from April 1st to April 18th. So as you're trying to figure out who's eligible, who's not, how do I provide FML leave? I've never done that before. You have until April 18th before the Department of Labor is going to enforce compliance. Second, businesses under 50 have the ability to apply for an exemption to not provide this required leave if it would jeopardize the viability of your business as a going concern. We don't have regulations right now about what that exemption looks like. We're expecting guidance from the Department of Labor sometime midweek next week. That was kind of a tangent, but I want to make sure I get that in there.
Thank you, Lilia. The final question we've got is, what if the employee has moved on and doesn't want to return when you ask them to?
My guess that is probably a Suzi question related to grants. As far as if you have documentation they don't want to come back, they're no longer your employee from a legal standpoint.
I would agree with that. Again, we don't know what's really going to happen with this CARES Act. I mean, we're going to see if everything passes as proposed, but I would say if you have the right documentation showing termination that this person does not want to move forward in your organization, I think there'll be the opportunity to be able to show that, to be able to get those loans forgiven. So make sure that you have proper paperwork, I guess, is probably in closing is what I would say.
Thank you both so much. We're gonna end it there. And really, I mean, thank you isn't even enough. So, Bridget, do you have any closing words?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Maggie said of just thanking our speakers today. And for our nonprofits right now, understand that we as your community foundation are here to support you. We know this is complicated and we're here for the long haul because we know this is going to be a long journey. So we are doing our best to respond as timely as possible to all of the emails and phone calls we've received. But don't hesitate to reach out to us. It's really important for us to understand what your needs are right now so that we can help facilitate getting resources to you, whether it's volunteers or financial resources. So we're doing our best to do that. Please stay tuned for our short questionnaire for our relief fund that we'll be putting out shortly. But if you do have any questions, please let us know. Big thanks to Maggie for helping to facilitate this today. And thank you for all of your time being on this call. We appreciate you.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you all have a good rest of your day and it's as least stressful as it possibly can, and that you get some fun in this weekend, even though days and weekends look a little similar these days. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.